Europe trembled beneath the shadow of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a titan, a conqueror who had redrawn the map of Europe with his sword. France had become an empire under his iron will. He had humbled Austria. He had crushed Prussia. He had marched his legions across the continent, leaving a trail of victories in his wake. But Napoleon's ambition had sown the seeds of his own downfall. His enemies, battered but unbroken, had risen again. They formed a grand coalition, a last desperate alliance to break the French Empire. England, the implacable enemy, stood at the forefront of this coalition. They poured their wealth into the war chests of Europe. They dispatched their finest soldiers to the continent, led by the stoic Duke of Wellington. Wellington, a veteran of countless campaigns, had honed his skills in the crucible of the Peninsular War. He had learned to combat Napoleon's armies, to blunt their attacks and exploit their weaknesses. He was a master of defensive warfare, a patient and calculating general who knew how to choose his ground and make it a killing field. The year was 1815. The air was thick with anticipation. The armies of Europe were on the march. Napoleon, escaping his exile on the island of Elba, had returned to France. His reappearance had electrified the nation. He had rallied his veterans, reformed his armies, and prepared for one final, decisive confrontation. He knew that the fate of his empire, his legacy, rested on the outcome of this coming battle. The stage was set for a clash of titans. Napoleon, the Emperor of France, the master of offensive warfare, the man who had made himself a legend. Against him stood Wellington, the Iron Duke, the master of defensive warfare, the man who had never lost a battle. Their armies, hundreds of thousands strong, converged on a small village in Belgium. A village destined to become a synonym for epic battles and shattered empires. That village was Waterloo. The morning of June 18th, 1815 dawned bright and clear. The sun, rising over the rolling hills of Waterloo, illuminated a scene of impending carnage. The two armies stood poised, like predators circling each other, ready to unleash their fury. The tension was palpable, a suffocating blanket of anticipation that hung over the battlefield. Then, at 11 o'clock, the silence was shattered. The French artillery opened fire, sending a storm of iron hurtling towards the British lines. The earth shook, the air crackled, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Cannonballs plowed through the British ranks, leaving trails of death and destruction. Yet the British stood firm, their lines protected by earthen ramparts and the reverse slopes of the ridge. Wellington, impassive amidst the maelstrom, directed his troops with calm precision. He was a rock in the storm, his composure inspiring his men. Napoleon watched the bombardment with a critical eye. He was waiting for a sign, a weakening in the British lines that would signal the moment for his infantry to attack. His infantry, the backbone of his army, was eager to close with the enemy. They had marched across Europe, enduring hardship and privation, and they were hungry for victory. They were led by seasoned officers, veterans of countless battles, who instilled in their men a sense of discipline and purpose. The French infantry advanced in massive columns, their bayonets gleaming in the sunlight. They marched with unwavering determination, the ground trembling under their feet. The British met them with disciplined volleys of musket fire, their red coats a stark contrast against the green fields. The battle lines surged back and forth, a deadly dance of attack and counterattack. The ground was littered with bodies, the air thick with the groans of the wounded and the cries of the dying. Section 5. A Sea of Mud and Blood. The battlefield at Waterloo was a scene of unimaginable carnage. The ground, churned up by artillery fire and the tramp of thousands of men, was transformed into a sea of mud and blood. The air was thick with the stench of gunpowder, the cries of the wounded, and the silence of the dead. Men fought with desperation, driven by fear, patriotism, and the primal instinct for survival. The French cavalry, the famed cuirassiers, charged repeatedly against the British lines. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, their swords flashed, and their horses thundered across the battlefield. They were a terrifying sight, a wall of steel and muscle crashing against the British infantry squares. But the British, formed in disciplined formations, met the charges with steady volleys of musket fire. The ground was littered with fallen horses and riders, the air filled with the screams of men and beasts. The French infantry, wave after wave, stormed the British positions. They were met with a hail of musket fire, their ranks thinned by canister shot and grape shot. Yet they pressed on, their bayonets lowered, their faces grim with determination. The British, their ranks thinned by casualties, fought with equal ferocity. They knew that their survival, the fate of Europe, rested on their ability to hold the line. Amidst the chaos and carnage, individual acts of heroism and sacrifice shone through. British officers rallied their men, leading them in desperate counterattacks. French soldiers, their faces blackened by gunpowder, charged into the teeth of British defenses. The battle raged on, a relentless back-and-forth struggle for every foot of ground. As the day wore on, the casualties mounted. The ground was covered in a carpet of bodies, the wounded crying out for help, their pleas lost in the din of battle. The sun, setting over the battlefield, cast a blood-red glow over the scene of carnage. The battle was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. Napoleon, facing the collapse of his army, made a desperate gamble. He ordered his remaining reserves, including the remnants of the Imperial Guard, to launch a final, all-out assault on the British center. He believed that if he could break through Wellington's lines, he could still salvage a victory from the jaws of defeat. It was a bold move, a gamble that reflected his unwavering belief in his own destiny. The Imperial Guard, veterans of countless victories, advanced with their customary discipline and ferocity. They marched towards the British lines, their bearskin hats a symbol of their elite status, their bayonets fixed, their faces grim with determination. They were the last hope of the French army, the final throw of the dice. The British, exhausted but resolute, braced for the impact. They had withstood hours of relentless assaults, but they knew that this final attack would determine the outcome of the battle. Wellington, his face etched with tension, rallied his men, exhorting them to stand firm against the enemy. The two forces collided in a thunderous clash of steel and fury. The ground shook, the air was filled with the roar of musketry and the clash of swords. The Imperial Guard, their ranks thinned by casualties, fought with the courage of desperation. But the British, their lines reinforced by fresh troops, held their ground. The Imperial Guard's attack faltered, their advance stalled by the stubborn British resistance. The British, sensing weakness, launched a counterattack. Their lines surged forward, their muskets blazing, their bayonets thrusting. The Imperial Guard, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, began to waver. Their ranks broke, and they fell back in disarray. The sun set on a battlefield littered with the debris of shattered armies and shattered dreams. The Battle of Waterloo, a day of thunderous cannons, clashing steel, and unimaginable carnage, had reached its end. The French, led by the once invincible Napoleon, had been decisively defeated. Their dreams of empire lay in ruins, their legions scattered, their emperor facing a final ignominious exile. The victory at Waterloo belonged to the Allies, a testament to their unwavering determination, their strategic brilliance, and their willingness to fight for a common cause. Wellington, the Iron Duke, had added another laurel to his crown, his reputation as a masterful tactician further enhanced. Blucher, the fiery Prussian commander, had finally achieved his long-held ambition of crushing Napoleon and avenging past humiliations. The consequences of Waterloo reverberated across Europe. The French Empire, forged in the fires of revolution and expanded through years of conquest, was no more. Napoleon, the man who had made himself emperor, the man who had redrawn the map of Europe, was once again a prisoner, this time destined for the remote island of St. Helena. His era was over, his dreams of universal empire shattered on the fields of Waterloo. Europe, weary of war, yearned for a lasting peace. The Congress of Vienna, convened in the aftermath of Napoleon's downfall, sought to redraw the map of Europe, to restore stability and prevent future conflicts. The balance of power, carefully calibrated, aimed to prevent any single nation from dominating the continent. The era of Napoleonic conquest was over, replaced by an era of diplomacy and compromise.